see. Now, can you hear me okay? Yeah? No problem? I feel like I'm at a home game, right? Because all I had to do was a very short commute today to get to my speaking engagement. And I'm delighted to be here. And I know many of you in the room. Some of you I don't know, and I look forward to meeting you maybe at one of the breaks. But I can tell you that you might, if you don't know me, detect just a little bit of American twang in my speech today. And that's because I have a Canadian mother and an American father. And so I've been lucky enough to live and work on both sides of the border and enjoy and understand both cultures, if you will. Currently living in the Vancouver area, and after being in the U.S. for quite a while, and delighted to be back. I'm pleased to say that it's not pouring down rain today, which makes things definitely nicer. And Jenny and Fran and Chris and Lauren have been really, really enjoying Vancouver in the short visit that they've had here. And I have a very funny feeling that they have now become permanent tourists and will come back to Vancouver and the area many times to come. Is that a fair statement? Fair statement. Absolutely. Now, when Chris was speaking, he asked a lot of questions and not a whole lot of feedback here. And I'm sitting here, I know these guys. I know they talk more than what they're talking right now. So we'll see where we go from there. I am, let's see if we can, we don't need that. By the way, the introduction that you just heard about me was written by my mother, just so you know. When Fran asked me to do this and to work with the Rocket program, and as she said, this is our 10th city. We have another 2 cities to do this week. We're going on to Las Vegas and then to Dallas. And then we're doing 3 cities in November, where we start in Miami, we go on to Boston, and then to Phoenix. But when she asked me if I would participate in this educational program, this continuing education program, I said I'd be delighted to, but I really want to be able to talk about something that's tactical, something that's really grassroots with regard to where revenue management is today. I wanted to talk about something more strategic in nature, something that maybe is a little further for you to reach as revenue management professionals. And I wanted to talk about something about leadership. And Fran was kind enough to say, you know what, Bonnie, you have carte blanche. You can talk about what you want to talk about. And for someone to say to you that they basically say, you say what you want to say and invite you to speak, I mean, that's an extraordinary offer that I simply could not turn down. So thank you, Fran, for having me as part of your overall continuing education program for revenue managers and directors and so forth. And as Fran was saying, annually they do a major conference. But oftentimes, you know, and I've pretty much been able to, in most cases, attend that conference every year. It's a lot of corporate people, a lot of vice presidents and SVPs, certainly some regional people and so forth, but not as many unit level directors of revenue and revenue managers. And frankly, and I know we have owners in the room today, I know we have some front office people, from sales people in the room today. It's a real mixture. We're not seeing these people as much at the Revenue Optimization Conference either. So the idea of bringing Rocket to your city and to other cities is to reach out to the unit level directors of revenue and revenue managers, and to those who are primarily involved with their markets. For instance, you might be involved with a lot of different hotels, but largely maybe in the same geographic area, and so forth. So we're delighted to be able to come and bring educational content to you where basically you don't have to go anywhere, you can get that educational opportunity right here in your own backyard. And as Fran was saying, there's a very strong BC chapter of HSMAI. And I don't know whether you know this or not, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jenny, because Jenny is the one that's working with all the chapters around North America. But I don't think Toronto has a chapter. No. All right? Now, people who live in Vancouver would go, well, that's just the Torontonians. Of course. They don't know what they're doing. So one of the things I want to do today is I want to make sure we don't do what I call Chinese food training. Now, have you ever heard of Chinese food training? You're smiling, but do you know? I see some nods. This is where you're really full during the course of what's going on. Like today, in this room, you're pumped. But all of a sudden you get back to your hotels and you're hungry. It's like, you can get pumped up here, but how do you take this back into your everyday work life? And so what we want to do today is make sure that, yes, you'll be full today, but I don't want you hungry down the road. Next Tuesday, sitting there, well, forget about all that. I got to get back to work here. I can't do any of the things that Bonnie has suggested that I do. So we're going to try very hard to keep you from feeling hungry down the road. And this is going to be done in a couple of different ways. Now, it might mean that maybe you look at something today, something you know already, but is just a little bit different, that you're almost taking a different lens to it, that you know about something and you go, well, I hadn't actually thought about it like that. Or maybe we introduce something to you that's completely new, something that, hey, I didn't even know about that before. But that can help me in my job. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the revenue management professionals in this room and those who support those professionals, whether you're a vendor or a salesperson or a front office person, right? These people have come up, many of them, through the ranks. Now some of them, how many of you went to school and studied revenue management? Not a hand goes up. How many of you sort of just kind of learned it as you got into it and you went from maybe res into other parts? Is that a fair statement? Yeah, lots of hands. Well, here's the sobering thought, and this is actually a quote from Chris Crenshaw. And I think I probably interpreted it maybe differently, Chris, than you originally thought. But he said, being the expert is no longer where the value is. You're revenue management experts. You came up through the ranks. But things are changing so rapidly right now that unless you keep up, now only in Vancouver. That's the first time I've ever been outshouted by a seagull. The bottom line is, unless you keep up with what's going on in this discipline and how rapidly it's changing, the fact that you're an expert in revenue management isn't enough anymore. That's not where the value is. So what we want to do today is impart some information to you that'll help you become more valuable to your organizations. That's the key. And how do we do that? We hopefully get you to see things, whatever it might be, in a little bit different light, something you know already, or something that's completely new. Because if you become more valuable to your organizations, definitely you've got some job security. And think about it. We've gone through a lot of what I'll call sort of generations of revenue management. And I nicknamed them sort of the first, second, and third generation. And there will be a fourth and a fifth. But that first generation, in many cases, somebody in reservations. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we decided to give that person a different name. They're going to be a revenue manager now. And some of them made it and some of them didn't. Because the good characteristics of a good revenue manager and the good characteristics and traits of a good res manager oftentimes are very different. And then we kind of got into this second generation. And my guess is that a lot of the revenue management professionals today are second generation revenue management professionals. And you do still a lot of tactical work. You try to be as strategic as you can be, but it's really, it's really about rooms revenue. Where we want to take you, and this way you become even more valuable to your organizations, is we want to take you into the third generation, where you're dealing, you're the director of demand management. You're the director of profit, right? Profit optimization, which takes you into a different world. So let me take you through the life of a, let's say a week in the life of a revenue manager. Fair enough? Let's see what it looks like. What does it look like for you? Is any of this, a week in the life of the revenue manager, resonate with you? Let's say this is Monday. Sorry about that, sales guys. And this is Tuesday. Come on. And this is Wednesday. Who are you going to be? And this is Thursday. And this is particularly for the women in the room, all right? Friday, particularly for the women in the room. And no disrespect, guys. We love you. But you got to note, there's a lot of women in this room today. And there are a lot of women in senior positions in revenue management. So this is for you. Next time you're up against trying to convince somebody, you know, you're trying to give your compelling story, think about that. So, the tactical piece that I want to talk about today has to do with forecasting. And what we typically find in these sessions is that because you're all competitors, you often don't say much about what's going on. I mean, your friends as well. I saw a lot of people come into the room today and they're all hugging and going, "Hi, how are you?" But you're competitors. So what I'm going to ask you to do at the end of each segment is just have a little short 1-minute, 2-minute conversation around your table and share an idea. Share the brain power. Because I can tell you something. I have a picture of a very famous tennis player here. I love to play tennis. But I tell you what, when I play tennis, I always want to play tennis with someone better than I am. Because if I play tennis with someone better than I am, I play better tennis. And on the other side of your screen, I love to play bridge. I'm not very good at it, but I love to play it. And I always love to play bridge with the players around the table, better players than I, because I always learn. So share something around your table today after each segment, an idea. It doesn't have to be hugely confidential, but just an idea that you have. Share your brain power. So my first piece is about forecasting. And later on, after lunch, I'm going to talk about total revenue management, and I have some different things I want to chat about because I've actually talked to the BC chapter of HSMAI about total RM. And then finally, Chris and I are going to do a tag team effort and talk about data visualization. So I have to say, first of all, thank you, Matt Lusk, for helping me put the content together today for some of what we're going to see. But let me ask you this. When you're doing forecasts, right, do you ever have to change it? Right? I asked this question on a webinar recently, and here were the options for the answers. Always, sometimes, rarely, never. Which answer do you think came up? Always. Always. It's nerve-wracking. And this is what happens. We don't want statistics that reflect the actual market situation. We want statistics that reflect what we decided in the boardroom. That's what happens. So I have found that generally on the tactical side of revenue management, forecasting is the weakest link. And you know what? To this day, we struggle with this. So what I want to ask you today is about forecast accuracy. Right? How accurate are your forecasts, and how do you go about testing for accuracy? Because you can be much more valuable to your organizations if you're a good forecaster. So let me ask you this. How many of you, part of your incentive is based on how accurately you forecast? Do we have anybody that has an incentive that has some component criteria as to your forecast accuracy? Not a single hand goes up. Really? I'm shocked. Are you shocked, Matt? I'm shocked. Well, let me ask you this. Do you check your own accuracy of your forecast? Okay, yeah. Tina says yes.
Depends which version of your forecast.
Well, yes. And we'll talk about that, Ann. You're absolutely right. Accuracy has to be measured at the market segment level, right? Do you measure it at the market segment level? I got a little nods. Come on, Canadians, you can at least put your hands up from time to time. All right. What about the daily level? No? Some. Okay. So we know that there are 3 primary methodologies in forecasting in our business, right? It's demand forecasting, it's occupancy forecasting, it's revenue forecasting. And the one type of forecasting that I hope you are doing, and certainly Ideas, who introduced me, and Fran mentioned Rainmaker as a partner as well, they certainly want you to be looking at demand forecasting and in an unconstrained way. So when you do your forecast, I mean, think about it. You have a revenue forecast, which, as Ann was saying, can sometimes be, if I put words in your mouth, a little bit political, right? A little political in nature. You have an ops forecast, sort of occupancy, that had better be realistic. And then you have a demand forecast that's really about potential. What's the potential of how well I can do on a given month? And think about this. Who's your audience for these? Right? Your audience for your revenue forecast is probably an owner or an asset manager or a GM, maybe a corporate person. And your audience for really the occupancy forecast is the operating departments. Right? Your operating departments want to know how busy you're going to be so that they staff properly and so on. But you are the audience too, to your own forecasts. And so you've got to be paying attention to how accurate they are. And it isn't just, I was, accurate for the month. So your forecasting challenges are an ongoing thing. You have shrinking lead times, you have a change in mix, you have, a distribution environment that is highly complex. We'll talk about that later today. And we do find that our segments are blurring. Do we really know why the person is here? Used to be pretty easy to detect that. Now if they come through Expedia, say, we may not know. Are they here on leisure? Are they here on business and so forth? So we have some very savvy consumers out there as well, which makes your ability to forecast even more difficult. And sometimes I ask the question, does the consumer know more than I know? Does this consumer know more than we know as forecasters? And think about it. Think about what information is available to them. We did a little just flights to Vancouver. What's that? 28.5 million hits in a split second. That's extraordinary. You can go on to Kayak, which now is owned by Priceline, right? Because a huge amount of consolidation in the online world. And they'll tell you whether to buy something or to wait, and at what level of confidence they have in that particular prediction. And they'll also, of course, let you create a price alert, so you don't even have to do the homework. They'll send you an email or an alert if something changes. And there's all kinds of tools online where you can tell exactly what day it makes the most sense to fly, in this case from Toronto to Vancouver. And on the hotel side, there's just as much. Simple, last minute hotel deals in Vancouver. And Lauren, by the way, who's an expert in digital marketing, will tell you that above the fold of any search, it's only paid advertising. Even if you've got a really good SEO situation with regard to how you optimize your online presence, unless you're paying for it, you're not at the top of the page anyway. So what have we got here? That's 6.5 million hits. And for Vancouver, now with many of the tools, this just happens to be a Kayak tool, 86% rooms in Vancouver are going fast. 86% available rooms are now booked. And you can see the same thing whether you're in North Vancouver or you're in Richmond. And you might look at this and go, well, I know the real truth of this. Or, come on, from $41, come on. What is this, a new hotel built underneath the Granville Street Bridge? Right? But the point is, this is what consumers are seeing. I can tell you, just recently, my sister made a booking on a flight because she saw a little thing that said, well, there's only 3 seats left. You laugh, but that's what the consumer is seeing. And of course, Expedia will help you. No, we have Expedia here in the room. Thank you, Expedia, you're here. We have Booking.com, I think, in the room. Thank you, Booking.com, you're here. This is the kind of opportunities. 908 people are shopping for Vancouver hotels, 55% booked. So our consumers, while we're trying to forecast, have a lot of information. And they can, you can use a place like Yapta. Everybody know what Yapta is? Yeah, got lots of nods. Maybe not everybody nodding. Your amazing personal travel assistant. You can small corporate businesses use it, large corporate businesses use it. I use it. I had to go to a board meeting recently in San Diego. I wanted to stay at a different hotel than the board meeting was where it was taking place. I just went into Yapta, put in an alert, for the Hilton Bayfront, which is where I wanted to stay, and waited for the emails to come. So there's all kinds of tools online. You know, the Travel Hacker is one. We'll talk about some others this afternoon. And you can get any kind of price alerts for hotels, for air, for car rentals. And when it comes to the Google searches, I mean, here's a quote from Google. This is just last year, when the U.S. Department of Justice decided a week ago not to stand in the way of Expedia's acquisition of Orbitz. The DOJ cited Google's hotel and flight products as a sign that new players are emerging to ensure a competitive market. Google is unbelievable in this area. How many of you know Google destinations? Yeah, we've got a couple, 2 or 3. Are you using it? Have you used it yet? It's unbelievable. I'm going to give you more information about that this afternoon. But let's just say you're forecasting in process. You've got the signs up on your door, don't bother me, right? There's a genius at work. And you do your forecast, and you're happy because you go home that night and think, God, I got the forecasting done for this month. 30, 60, 90-day forecast is out there. I've distributed it. Whew, thanks. Now what? Well, you go back and check for accuracy? And do you check it against what they told you to put in or what you actually did? So let me ask you this. What kind of accuracy are you looking for? Let's just take this example where, my goodness, this forecaster must be a genius. 8,640 room nights and actual sold 8,594, 46 room nights off. This is a fantastic forecast. And what's even more difficult is everybody's happy. GM's happy, the current happy, the corporate's happy, Wall Street's happy, owner's happy, because you nailed it. Now, are you happy? I'm seeing no. Why not?
The daily variance.
Yes, the daily variance. Because in this scenario, at 3.8%, and by the way, the RMSs will tell you they'll get you within 3% and better, is very different than 10.4. And what we've done here is we've looked at what we call absolute variances, which means, of course, that whether the variance is maybe you over or under forecasted, it's still a variance. And you have to go and find what the issue is with your forecasting. Do you have a transient problem? Maybe there's just certain things happening in certain segments that you didn't pick up on. Or maybe you've got a group issue. Maybe groups you thought were going to perform a certain way and didn't. But unless you dig into the detail and you look at it by segment and you look at it by day, you're not going to know these things. And these are hints for you. These are clues as to why and how something happened. And in the end, your assumptions were wrong. And maybe it's a day-a-week issue. Maybe you're really good at forecasting certain days of the week, but not others. And if you will take the time to do forecast accuracy analysis, you'll start to see where your assumptions are off. So that you have an opportunity to go back and go, wow, you know, I really thought it was going to be this way, but it ended up being something else. And I can tell you that this kind of analysis works tremendously well. I had a client that was in a U.S. hotel close to the Canadian border. He was having trouble with his forecasting. We went in, we looked at the detail, and he was over forecasting weekends. And he said, yeah, but we have a lot of Canadians that come on the weekends. I said, do you know what the currency exchange rate is between U.S. and Canadian dollars? No. Well, right now, give or take, the Canadian dollars are worth 30% less. He had never taken that into consideration. But when he started looking into his numbers, he started to see where his assumptions were wrong. So imagine that you were going to visualize this in a chart like this. then your variances would look something like this. But if you start to think in terms of variances in absolute terms, and an absolute variance is just taking a negative and calling it a positive, right? That's the whole idea. So that you can basically look into this and see that this is where your forecasting is off. You do this same thing in absolute terms, and this is how your chart's going to look. And that's the key, is to look at an under-forecasting situation as being just as serious as an over-forecasting situation. Because at the end of the day, and again, we're visualizing some numbers here, your variances are going to be much easier to detect. And this kind of a chart in the chart wizard part of Excel would take you about 30 seconds. Questions so far? Comments? Everybody still with me? Okay. Oh, that's right. Fran has prices for questions. So the forecast accuracy analysis is for your benefit. It certainly will give you an opportunity to test your assumptions, whether it's transient or maybe your group blocks, maybe group block management has slipped a little bit. You can also, of course, identify how certain things are happening in different segments. But the point is that when you forecast, you're supposed to sell to your forecast. If you're saying, well, I'm not going to take as many rooms at this level because I've got some strength here, then that's how you sell, right? That's how you set your sell strategies. And one more thing. When you start doing this, just keep it to yourselves for the immediate term, right? Until you get really good at it, then you can shout it out to the world, to your revenue team, to your GM, to your owner, and so forth. But kind of just work with it yourself for a while. Do it for yourself to make you a better director of revenue or revenue manager. And see if, as you dig into the information, it helps you to look at things differently. Yes? Do you want to give the man the speaker box? Jenny, is this speaker box on, do you think, or are we just not using it right?
It is. You have to act like a rock star, though, and put the microphone almost right up to it.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you now.
So one of the things about forecasting, you said you'd be very happy to see how your forecasts work out. And let's say your numbers come very close to what you forecast. But I still think you should compare yourself to your star comp, because that's going to tell you how the market is doing compared to what you did. Because your forecast may be right on, but maybe you missed the mark because your comp set shows you that you're not getting the occupancy that your competitor is getting.
Well, I would separate the two, all right? To me, the forecasting approach is to understand the potential that you think your hotel has. But the second, in a different chapter or a different piece of this, I would then go back and have a look at how that forecast and performance played out in the marketplace. So I think of them separately, because I do think that you have to, sure, you're looking to see whether the city's busy or not, or you have more compression or not, and so forth. But what this gentleman is saying is, after the fact, then how did that play out in terms of how well you were able to attack the market? So I just think of them as separate things, at least at that point in time. So I want to just quickly, before we have a bite of lunch and so forth, is to introduce to you some newer concepts. Now, some of these concepts are things maybe you are doing, maybe you aren't doing, but I'm starting to see more and more of this on a routine basis in hotels. And we work with hotels and resorts around the world. And we work certainly in North America, but we work in Mexico, we work in Latin America, we work in the Caribbean, we work in Asia Pacific. So I'm just going to share 3 quick concepts with you. The first is a value index. How many of you are using your value index as, a piece of the puzzle for price leveraging? Not seeing hands go up. Well, value scores are essentially in your reputation management software. And I have to tell you that this metric is not very old. It's not been around a long time. But basically is looking at your value proposition. And there's a certain calculation that you do that's just almost identical to what you would get as an index in a STAR report. So think about this. And those of you who have known me have heard me tell this story before, but I think it's a great sort of example of how you deal with a value proposition. Because all of your hotels have value propositions. And when you think about it, whether it's you or your competitor, value comes out of quality and price. High quality, I'm kind of expecting to pay a higher price. Lower quality, lower. And on the quality side, I'm looking at, okay, what comes out of that? Well, it's the product itself. I have a beautiful room in this hotel, all right? Thank you, Brandy. And at the same time, the service associated with that, great service when I went to the front desk last night to check in. And so I have, in my mind, some kind of perception of value. Well, let me give you an example, and this is out of Fort McMurray. Right? We did some work for some hotels in Fort McMurray. And by the way, I looked for the most ridiculous picture of someone smoking cigarettes that I could find on the internet. And by the way, you can find anything on the internet. Okay, so this guy's smoking 1,000 cigarettes. What's that have to do with the story? Here's the story. The hotels in Fort McMurray, we were talking about demand and how demand is changing and so forth. And this was before the turn down in terms of the way in which energy, gas, oil, and so forth has had some difficult times. But I said, well, has anything changed? Have you seen anything shifting up in the marketplace? And the people in the room, there were a number of hotels in the room, said, well, you know what, for some reason, like we seem to have a greater demand for rooms in which you can smoke a cigarette. And I said, wow, that's a surprise to me. I mean, most people are like quitting smoking, and a lot of hotels like don't even allow smoking. And I said, what do you think's happening? And they said, well, some of the hotels in the city have gone smoke-free. All right, so the key here is that supply and demand has changed. Right? So I asked them, I said, do you charge more for a person to smoke in the room? Like, do you charge more for a smoking room? They said, no. I said, well, could you? Could you charge more? And they, they were sort of thinking, and I said, well, let's ask the smokers in the room. And I knew there were smokers in the room because every time we took a break, they went outside to smoke a cigarette. They would be with a seagull right now, right? So I asked them, would you pay $10 more to smoke in your room? And they said, are you kidding? Of course. Do you know how cold it gets in Fort McMurray in the middle of February? I said, okay. Would you pay $50 more? Silence. Silence. Nobody raised their hand. And finally somebody at the back said, well, I'll pay $10 more, but I'm not paying $50 more. I'll go out and freeze my butt off before I pay $50 more to smoke a cigarette in my room. And I said, well, there's your value proposition. Somewhere between 10 and 50 is what someone is going to be willing to pay. And guess what? They were able to charge a little more for that smoking room in the winter than the summer. But they did start charging more for the privilege of smoking a cigarette in the room. So all of us have reputation management, whether we subscribe to a reputation management platform or not, or whether we go on to TripAdvisor, which is kind of the gorilla in the room. We have access to information about what our customers say about our value. And how many of you do subscribe to a reputation management platform? I see quite a few hands. I don't know, maybe other hands, maybe people don't know if a certain organization does or not, but I can't believe that you would not be subscribing to a reputation management platform in 2016. So if you're in a hotel or an organization that's not subscribing, I think you're missing the boat. It is not good economics. But most of you seem to be. So you know that somewhere in that reputation management software, or even just on TripAdvisor, you can find out what people are saying about you in terms of value. And so what I did was I went online and I I mean, I can reveal this to you guys because these people are not in the room, but we went online and we looked at 50 reviews for the Banff Springs Hotel, Fairmont Banff Springs. Now, I know we've got some great Fairmont people here today, but this isn't one of your hotels, see? And we looked at 50 reviews, and we looked specifically at what was the answer to the value question. And the value question answer worked out like this. You saw most, what's that, over 81% were saying it was really good or excellent. They were rating it 4 or 5. But what we were able to get out of that is a value score. And in this case, the value score, based on this small sample, was 4.24. So how do you make an index out of that if you were going to do it? And the way you do that is you simply take your value score and you divide it by the comp set value score. But what's interesting is in your reputation management platforms, you get to identify a competitive set. So you can actually compare your value score to a value score of a competitor and find out, how are you rating? How does the customer see you in terms of value? Because think about it, if you had this example of a value score of 4 and a comp set value score of 2.45, you would have an index of 163.3. Now, what would that tell you? Charge a bit more. Absolutely. Now, if you've got a value score that's looking more like this, you have a problem. Because you either have to adjust your prices to be more in line with what the consumer sees as the value of that particular hotel room night, or maybe you go to an owner and say, Mr. Owner or Mrs. Owner, you need to put some money into this hotel because our value scores are not strong enough. And they've done all kinds of studies on this. You can look at the Cornell site for the studies that they've done that say if you will improve your score, your overall review score, it will give you pricing power. And if you've got a low score, you may have a problem. If you have a high score, you may be able to actually push the envelope quite legitimately because the customer is saying to you, I think this is good value. And think about this. We all as consumers have some concept of value. If you walk into a store and you see a price tag on something and you go, I'm not paying that for that. Or you see a price tag and you go, wow, that's a deal. It means you have some concept. Nushi, did you have a question or a comment?
No, I do have a question, sorry. Just to reverse the value score again, based on seasons.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the forecasting of that is a little bit of a challenge.
It does. I don't know if everybody heard Nushi, but she's talking about thinking of the value, if I understand what you're saying, thinking of the value proposition in different times of the year. And again, a good reputation management platform is going to give you that information. You can slice and dice it any way you wish. And yes, we're just about to talk about how does that relate to forecasting. Why does this matter? Why am I talking about value indexing and a forecast accuracy discussion? Well, think about this. If you have an accurate forecast, and you therefore have the right sales strategies in place, you should have some kind of balance in your value index. And if you take that a step further, the forecast sets the price, your value score justifies that price, and your value proposition is realized. Now, people ask me, well, what's a good balance in your index? And I can tell you right now that there's not consensus in this in the industry right now that this is a pretty new concept. And I would say, I don't know, maybe between 98 and 102, 3, 4, somewhere in there. If I see a value score getting into the mid or low 90s, I really worry about what the customer is saying about your value. And if I see something really high, I'm thinking, I think maybe there's a little room to move here. But these reputation management reports are a gold mine for revenue managers and directors of revenue. And I appreciate that the operation looks at them from a service point of view. I want you to be looking at them from a revenue management point of view. So how many of you are forecasting market share? I see 3 hands. I could say something, but I won't. Maybe I will. 3 of my clients. Just want you to know. Okay. And we didn't pay them to say this. Well, how many of you do a forecasting of market share maybe during the budget process? Now we see more hands. Not many more, but a few. But what I'm asking you to do is to think about forecasting market share monthly. And let me just give you this example. Imagine that you're trying to forecast November, right? And so you put your forecast out. The next step is for you to find a way to create a hypothesis on how the market's going to perform. Now, I appreciate that this is not an exact science, but you've got a lot of information from STR about how, how's the year been trending from an occupancy perspective, from an ADR perspective. You have information about your market. Are there a lot of citywides in Vancouver next month? Where are the compression? So you create a forecast for the market, a supposition, a hypothesis. And then you simply project your forecast into that supposition. And what you come up with here is you have what you believe is like a preview of what your star report might look like. And in this case, you see occupancy at 101, an index of 101, and rate at 96. And you might look at that and go, you know what, maybe there's some more out there. Now, I appreciate that in any given month you might have a different mix and so forth. But I have found market share forecasting to be incredibly valuable in helping set sales strategies and to be more precise about your sales strategies. Because this gives you a window on the future. It kind of gives you a chance to do something, to make an adjustment or react now before it's too late. And the idea is to make adjustments in your sales strategy that are going to improve your results. Now, the next thing you can do, and you can do this before or after, in other words, before the month occurs or after the month occurs, is you can do what we call dollarizing the index. How many people are dollarizing their index right now? Not many hands, but I know the ones that are up. So, this is a simple situation. The idea is that Chris and his team at STR are going to send you your star report. And it's going to have an index. And maybe the index is 100, or maybe it's 105, or maybe it's only 96. But what you want to know, particularly owners want to know, and GMs want to know, is what does that mean to me in dollars? And it's a simple mathematics. Think about this. Imagine that you took, and I know it's quite small here, all you have to do is take your RevPAR and your CompSet's RevPAR and look for the variance. It could be a positive variance, maybe you're up, it could be a negative variance. And then think about this. RevPAR is revenue per available room. We all know this. That's 101. So multiply it, that dollar variance, times the number of rooms in your hotel, times the number of days in the month, and find out what your index is worth in dollars. How much money did you leave on the table? How much money did you steal within your comp set? And when you start dollarizing your index, it becomes far more meaningful as a metric. So as we finish off here, a couple of last thoughts. How many of you have been asked to forecast RPI percentage change? Yes, I'm not surprised. And for those of you who haven't been asked to do that yet, get ready, because this is becoming more and more a standard, particularly in organizations that are publicly owned. And essentially what that owner or that asset manager is asking you to do is to predict the change that's going to occur in your share of the market. And when they see the possibility of negative RPI percentage changes, they freak. So This might be for some of you beyond where you have to be right now in your organizations, but believe me, you know about this and you start figuring out how to do this, you will be a more valuable entity within your company. Just though, keep it to yourself for a little while, because you know what happens as soon as you mention anything or you show somebody a new way to look at something, we want that too. Right? But nothing ever drops off the list. Right? You're not able to say, okay, you can have that, but you can't have this. And that's the general manager's pet report that he wants or she wants to see on their desk every morning, that you are laboriously putting together. So, as we get ready for lunch, right, and we are running a little bit behind, but as we get ready for lunch, take a minute or two at your table and share the brain power. Share an idea with a colleague. You don't have to give away any royal secrets here, but share the ideas. Fair enough? And then write down one takeaway. Because if you guys will leave today with just 3 things that you're going to go back and do differently or think about differently in your companies, then you have spent valuable time today in improving your overall knowledge of revenue management, your value to your organizations, your value, in fact, to your careers. So spend a couple of minutes talking amongst yourselves at your table. You don't have to say it out loud to the whole world. And then write down a takeaway. Any last minute questions before we do that? Does it make sense? Okay, good. We're off to a good start.